With the cost of wood these days, I didn't want to spend more than I absolutely needed to on this project. Initially, I wanted to use a 1x8 so it also wouldn't be too heavy, but then I saw the cost of a 2x8 and decided to go that direction instead. It was half the cost, which to me is crazy. You would think it's the opposite. But I picked up 3 1x8x10 boards to build the legs of the fireplace. And for the rest of the frame base, I'm going to use scrap wood from my garage. Now, I made my fireplace a little taller than you would typically see because I'm mostly going to use this for staging my DIY projects, and the area it's going in has 12-foot ceilings. So I cut my legs at 42 inches tall. After the first cut, I took the piece inside to make sure I liked the height of it, and then cut down 5 more pieces so I have 6 42-inch boards. When I need to cut wood that's all the same length, I put my first cut piece directly on top of the next piece that needs cut. Then make sure the end is flush with each other. Hold the boards in place like this while pulling the saw blade down. And then you want to slide the boards until the top pieces touch the saw blade. Just make sure the ends are still flush, and this is where you want to make the next cut. I promise you this method will turn out much more accurate than individually measuring each piece. Oh my gosh, you guys, I had so many challenges to overcome during this project. This first issue was apparently a precursor to what was to come. I kept blowing the power and couldn't figure out why. Eventually, I realized it was because my space heater was plugged into the same circuit and stealing all of the power. I must have tripped this breaker 10 times before I figured that out. Once I finally got all my boards cut, I need to assemble them. I don't want to see any screws on the outside of my fireplace, so we're going to add pocket holes. I have this Craig jig, which makes it super easy. You can find a Craig jig set at most hardware stores or on Amazon for about $35. I'll link the one I use in my description box. I made 3 pocket holes on 4 of the 6 boards that I cut. So here's what we have so far, and I'm going to take 3 boards, 2 with the pocket holes and 1 without, and now make the leg. You want to lay the boards out so the one with no holes is in the center. I'm going to make a U shape with the 2 pocket hole boards sitting on top of the non-pocket hole board. And now I'm using these 2.5-inch Craig screws to secure them together. I started with my 2 end screws, that way I knew the edges were square before adding the middle screw. Then repeated that for the second side and made 2 legs just like this. Next, I need to figure out how wide I want the center opening. So I brought the legs inside and placed them where they're going to live. Also, I'm sorry the lighting is going to be a little bit wonky and change throughout this video. I'm filming right in front of my sliding glass doors, and this room gets direct afternoon sun. So I tried not to film while the sun was setting and super intense. Okay, so for the next section, I'm using a 1x12 because I already had this on hand and cutting it down to 42 inches. This is going to be the face right above the legs. And I'm showing you here I have 2 pocket holes on each side to attach to the legs. But this was the next obstacle I ran into, and I'll show that in a minute, but I also cut down 2 more 1x12s at 8 inches to wrap around the sides. So I went to attach the sides to the face and realized the screw was coming out through the front of the board. And that's because I didn't have the depth of the pocket hole set correctly. I know you could adjust the Craig jig based on your wood depth, but I honestly didn't feel like figuring all of that out and just wood glued the sides together and added a few brad nails to hold it in place. Next, I'm going to start adding some detail and make this thing look pretty. Again, I'm using scrap wood I already had. This is a 1x6, and I'm going to add this to the bottom of the legs as a trim. I'll make sure to put all of the measurements in the description box in case you want to try something similar, but I need to cut the edge of this trim piece at a 45-degree angle. I want to miter the corners to wrap around the leg. I'm not gonna make you watch me cut every single piece, but for this and most of the trim pieces we add, the front piece will have two 45-degree angles on either side, while the sides have one 45-degree angle and one straight cut to sit against the wall. Now you will notice the inside piece is shorter than the leg. That's because I'm going to add a decorative insert on the inside. I'm going to use pole wrap for that inside detail. This stuff is a little more expensive, but I have gotten a lot of big projects and even a few smaller projects out of it, and I used up the rest of what I had on this fireplace. This stuff is super easy to cut. All you need is a utility knife or an X-Acto knife to cut between the slats. It cuts just like butter since the backing is paper. And a miter box will work to cut down the length. But my handsaw wasn't quite long enough to cut the 45-degree angle we need, and I don't know where my bigger one is, so I used the big saw. So since the pole wrap is so thin, I really can't attach it to the fireplace. So I glued a thin piece of scrap wood to the back of it. This allowed me to have more surface area to glue and brad nail the pole wrap onto the legs. So I added this like baseboard type piece on. Also, sorry about the lighting. This mantle is literally going right in front of my sliding glass doors. So the lighting is gonna keep changing throughout this video based on the time of day. But anyways, I added that on and I don't know why there is this like gap that's like so big right there because the back of this baseboard is flat. So you would think it would literally sit right up against there and be like that, and all I would have to do is caulk that little seam. But for whatever reason, I could not figure out how to get it to sit properly. So instead, I had these little shoe pieces that are wide on the bottom, narrow on top, and I can just put those right on top. So it is making it a little bit higher, even more so than maybe I had wanted, but I think it's gonna turn out looking really nice like this and just look a little bit more finished and not have such a large gap to fill in. So that's what I'm gonna do. We are improvising as I go on this project. So many things have not turned out the way I thought they would or the way I envisioned. And I've learned a lot about cutting angles and cutting different pieces for this fireplace, but we're getting there. And then for the top here, so I have these little inserts of my pole wrap that are on the inside portion of the mantle. And on the top, I added this little brace so that this piece can fit nicely and then it has something to rest up against behind it. And then also because this side was kind of bent a little bit, it was folded. So I wanted to make sure that that stays nice and flat and straight. To adhere this piece of pole wrap, I'm using Loctite instead of my wood glue. Now that I'm happy with how the bottom is looking, I need to finish up the second side. So I cut down all of my trim pieces and added them on. This is one project where it's nice that my craft room is right off the garage and I can just walk 10 steps to get to my saw. Now I need to caulk in everything. You can see I cut the smallest bit of the tip off and I cut it at an angle. This will help prevent too much caulk from coming out, plus it will start to spread it for you with that angle. Caulk is a DIYer's best friend. This will help hide any imperfections your miter cuts have or fill in any gaps. Me being a perfectionist, I go a little bit crazy with the caulk. Here's a comparison of how the caulk will just elevate your project by making everything look nice and seamless. Next, we need to start working on the top. I want to cover up that seam where the two wood pieces meet and found these decorative trim pieces at Home Depot. They have a ton of different options to match any home style. So I did the same thing here, mitered my corners so it wraps around the sides and glued it in place with my wood glue. Initially, I held the piece on with clamps because I didn't want the little nail holes if I could avoid them, but I did end up going back and adding the nails. Of course, the Loctite didn't do its job and my pull wrap piece fell right off once I removed those clamps, so I scraped the glue off and then went back in with my Tite Bond glue, which worked much better. Now for the hardest part of this project and the thing that gave me the most trouble. At the top of the mantle, I wanted a decorative trim and picked this beautiful crown molding up from Home Depot. This was the splurge piece since it cost over $7 per linear foot. I was willing to spend that for the look that I wanted. Okay, so this part was really confusing to me. I ended up wasting a lot of this decorative trim piece that I need to add right here. Actually, it goes the other direction, that I need to add right here on the mantle. So because of the way that it sits, like this is on the top and then this little piece is on the bottom. So it's like at an angle and there's a gap between the top. So it's not, if it was flat, it would be sitting like this, but it's at an angle. So it's up here like this. And this was so complicated to cut. I ended up messing up quite a few times, had to go back to Home Depot twice to get more material. And this was by far the most expensive piece on this entire mantle. So I was really disappointed in myself for messing up so many times, but I want to show you kind of how I finally figured it out. I watched several videos, and let me tell you, not to be biased or sexist, but the men that I watched were just like, here's how you do it. Boom, boom, boom. There you go. It's done. And then I found this one woman, I will link her video in the description box below, who explained it so thoroughly and so easy for me to understand that I finally got it when I watched her video after I messed up, I think 2 or 3 times. So I'm also going to show you how to get the correct cut where you need it to be mitered over here on the corner so that I can then have it wrap around the edge as well. You want to have your piece resting where it needs to go. And I'm going to kind of draw a reference line. This is not exactly the angle, not correct. I just need to know this is my outside corner, this is my inside corner. So I'm gonna draw a little line so that I know when I go out to my saw, this is the direction that it needs to go in. So now we're at the saw, and yes, I have my gloves on, I have my jacket on because it is in the 20s right now and it is freezing. You don't wanna lay it flat like this. You need to have it up at your angle. Exactly how this is going to sit on the mantle or the crown molding wherever you are putting something like this. So then what we need to do is turn our saw to the 45 degrees. So this angle is going to the right. We don't want to cut yet because then it's going to give us that inside corner here if I were to cut it like this. So what we need to do is flip it upside down. And we're going to cut it this direction. So you can see my reference line, it is going, this is my inside corner, this is my outside corner. It is still going in the correct direction, and this time it is going to cut the wood so that it is going back so I can wrap my piece around. It's going to give me that correct cut that we need, just like this one. There we go. We have our correct angle that we need going backwards. Now I need to do the same thing On the other side, I need to go measure for where we need to make our next cut. And here we go again with the struggles. Mason was helping me add the crown molding on, and the dang thing just kept falling on us. I was putting the brad nails on the thinnest part of the wood, and they were just going straight through. I had to add them a little bit higher up where the wood was thicker. I think it looks pretty good. You can see pretty obviously on this side, it doesn't line up. There's a pretty large gap right there, and I don't know how that happened because I measured it really well multiple times. So I don't know what happened. I'm going to fill it in. I think I did pretty good for my first time doing something like this. Obviously, I'm going to nitpick all of my mistakes, but this side looks pretty darn good. I need to fill in with some caulk, of course. Caulk fixes everything. Overall, it's starting to look really good. I am loving it so much. All right, let's add some more caulk. Next, we're adding some more detail pieces. I picked up this fluted wood casing that I thought ties into that pole wrap that we added. So we cut the bottom of this to an angle, 45-degree angle at the bottom, just because I already put this trim down already on the bottom here. So in order for it to sit a little bit nicer, a little bit more flush. It's still not going to be perfectly flush right here, but I have that angle going back that way. And then we can cut down the top of it so we can see where it needs to go right up here. All right, buddy, you want to measure it?
Like right here?
Yep, that one, that line right there. Yep. Next obstacle, here we go. I got these wood rosettes for the top of the casing, but the problem is they're not the same width. I could have just added the rosette right on top of the piece we added to cover the seam, but that wasn't what I wanted. I wanted there to be a space between the seam trim and the fluted casing. So I stood here forever trying to come up with a solution. In the end, I decided to cut a thin piece of the casing off at the bottom with my table saw. That way I can add the casing how I wanted it, there won't be any overhang or gaps where the rosette is, and I can just trim down the bottom piece of the casing and glue it back on. No one will ever know. But thinking back, I guess an easier method would have been to simply cut a notch out of either corner of the casing. This was the only piece I cut spot on the first try. After all of my troubles, I was so excited. This piece is really coming together. Next, I'm adding the top of the mantle and using another scrap 1x12 from my garage. I wish I would have added 2 1x12s and made each a little longer for a step look, but I can always go back and do that later on. I also added a top on the inside section, so there isn't a big hole if you look inside from the front. For one of the last details, I'm taking some more of the pole wrap to square off the inside section. It was looking a little flat and not like a true fireplace would with only one piece. I just used super glue to attach this one. I wasn't sure if anything else would work, and this is an immediate hold. You can see how it just gives that added dimension to the project. Alright you guys, if you're still here with me, hit that subscribe button because we are almost done. I took the mantle right out onto my deck and sanded the whole thing down. Now it's finally time to paint, and Sarge was curious, what color did we pick? It's Cracked Pepper by Behr. I wanted the mantle to be black and stand out against that white wall, but I didn't want a deep, dark black. I wanted a soft black. As soon as I opened this can, I knew this black wasn't quite going to be dark enough. It wasn't quite right, but I gave it a shot and started painting. I didn't like it. It was too much like a dark gray. So I went back to Home Depot and picked up the color Dark Secret. And I also swapped out the eggshell finish for satin to get that more high-end look. The difference is subtle, but I'm glad I got a slightly deeper black. This color is perfection. All right, you guys, are you ready to see this amazing, epic reveal for the most beautiful yet complicated furniture build I have ever taken on? Here's the next little area that we're going to be working on in the house, this little nook in my hallway. So I live in a ranch and this is just like an awkward little area. Between the kitchen is through there, bedrooms are off to the right, and then the living room is right behind me. So there was this little nook built in when we moved here, which is super cute. I don't ever know what to do with it, but I do still have Christmas decor in there right now. It's almost March. My mom's gonna make fun of me because I just made fun of her about having Christmas decor up last weekend, but anyways. And then down here is the dog food. So that needs to stay. I don't really have somewhere else I can put it in my house. And then the kids' school pictures are just on the table there, some storage. This is literally all of my camera equipment tucked in there, so it doesn't need to go there, but the dog bed needs to stay. Need to incorporate this somehow, but we're going to like build a like ladder shelf that's going to gradually get smaller as it goes up the wall. The size wood you use for the shelves may vary depending on how wide you want them to be. I used one 1x10x8 and one 1x8x8 for the surface of the 4 shelves. When shopping for wood, you want to find the straightest pieces possible. My camera wouldn't focus here, but you want to check all sides, the flat sides, front and back, as well as both edges. Holding the wood up like this will help you see any curves, warping, or cupping in the boards. And for the shelf edges, I used 2 1x2x8s. For the sides of the ladder, I used 2 1x4x8s, and all of my boards are common boards, which is the least expensive option in my Home Depot. So the total I paid for the wood was $59.76. These ladders can go for well over $100. Before I can start building, I need to get everything out of this space, and I wanted to paint the walls. They were gray, and I wanted them to be white so my decor can be the feature. All right, now I need to measure how wide I'm gonna have the shelves, because I don't want it to like stick out too far on this side, and then you're running into it whenever you're trying to walk into the kitchen or into the bedrooms or wherever. The container already goes right there. I might try to move it over a little bit just so it's not quite in the way, but I at least want the shelf to cover, like sit right on top of this. But then I need to account for the sides, the legs. So let's do 32. So I have a 1x10 out there that I'm gonna glue 2 of them together. I think this should work. I cut down 1x10s to be 32 inches long. I cut 2 of them, and we're gonna glue these together. And I'm sorry if my mic or my audio is sounding a little bit strange, because I bought new like wireless mics and it keeps like falling inside of my shirt. So I think it sounds muffled, but I didn't want to have it like sticking out like this. Clearly it's not that attractive, but you know, it is what it is. I'm gonna take my clamps, really long clamps that I have, and we're going to clamp these together so that they can dry for a few hours. I did the same thing with the 1x8, cut 2 pieces at 32 inches and glued them together. The last 2 shelves I did not need to alter. I used the remaining 1x10 and 1x8. Wood is not the exact measurement it says on the tag, so my shelf widths ended up being 18.5 inches, 14.5 inches, 9.5 inches, and 7.5 inches. Next, I can add the edges of the shelves using the 1x2. I cut the two sides the same width as the board, and then the back will sit in between. The 1x2s will sit on top of the shelf. You could also add them on the outside, but I preferred this look. For an immediate hold, and so I could continue working, I used wood glue and brad nails. Once I had all the shelves built, I'm going to sand them all down using my palm sander and a 100 grit sandpaper. I also rounded all of the edges. I don't have any fancy tools to round the edges, so I just use my palm sander and go back and forth from the front, roll it over the edges, then to the back, and keep doing this until it's as rounded as I like. I think this gives a more professional look.
All right, so we need to cut at a 10-degree angle on both sides of the 1x3 so that it's going to lean up against the wall.
I'm gonna clamp together my two boards, 10 degrees on the miter saw. You can see where the laser is, where it's gonna cut. It's gonna cut off that triangle, that little wedge. I have a mark where I want it to be. I want the top to be 2 inches wide. And then we're gonna cut this piece down. For the opposite side of the board that will sit on the floor, you cut the 10-degree angle widthwise instead of lengthwise like we just did. Now we can start painting all of the parts. I used Rust-Oleum Ultra Cover Premium Latex Paint in flat black. And now we need to start attaching the shelves, putting this whole thing together. And I know this angle is a little bit weird to film, but you can see, I'll give you a close-up here in just a second once I have these where they need to go. But they are the angles that we made. One slopes against the floor, one slopes up here against the wall. So I'm gonna start with the biggest shelf here. Make sure that it's sitting. I might need to move these out just a little bit more. This one can go straight up against the wall. I'm fine with that. And then is that big enough? That's perfect. Okay. All right, so I do want to make sure that it is level. Oh, look at that. Both this way and this way. Oh, it's a little bit not level this way. Okay. To attach the shelves, I drilled a pilot hole first and then used my spade bit to drill out a small hole that the screw will sit in, making it flush with the board. Then I took a wood screw and added one on each side of the shelf. That way I could adjust anything that may not have been level, but each shelf does have 4 screws with 2 on each leg. To get the spacing even between my shelves, I cut down a scrap board to 16 inches. This also helped the shelf have something to rest on while I screwed it in place since I was building this myself. So I'm a little bit disappointed in myself. I didn't think about how tall this was going to be, and that was my stupid mistake. I didn't measure. I should have waited to cut down the 1x3s until I knew exactly how tall this was going to be. I was just guessing it would be like 6 feet tall. And that turns out that it is a little bit too short for what I wanted. I just think it looks a little bit funny kind of stopping right there. I think it should go all the way up because right now I have 3 shelves and I want there to be 4. I think it would look better with 4, but then to make it that ladder shelf look,
you do need like the tops to be sticking out. And if I add a fourth shelf, it comes up like right to the top. So that's not what I want. So this is probably a terrible idea, but I'm gonna take the little wedges that I cut off on the backs that go up there. I'm going to glue them back together, wood glue them, brad nail them back together, and then attach the piece I cut off and cut this down. This is a little bit too tall if I have it like the full length. It's not, or it's too tall, so I'm gonna have to cut this down a little bit, but then I'm just kind of going to add to the top of this shelf. And it should be okay. That part is just gonna be decorative. It's not gonna have any weight on it, so it should be okay.
Here's what the top looks like. After I MacGyvered it back together, I let this dry overnight, but the next day realized I just needed to get new 1x4s and start over on the legs. And I'm so glad that I did, even though this gave me some additional work and having to repaint after I added the shelves back on.
So I've seen a few creators do this where they take the antique Waverly wax and apply it to black paint, and it ends up giving it like more of a rich, deep look to it. So I thought I would give it a try on this piece, and I'm just using some baby wipes to apply it and then shop cloths to wipe it back, letting it sit on there for a second. Bless you. I just poured a little bit into a souffle cup here. I'm gonna do the front half of this shelf so you can see the difference. It is really subtle, but I think it does add a little bit of depth. So I hope you can see the difference. I know I've always had a little bit of trouble seeing the difference when other creators would do this and seeing it on camera. So it seems like it's picking it up, and it just adds, it doesn't make it look brown. I feel like the camera's kind of making it look brown, but it does just look like a little bit deeper and richer.
I hope you guys enjoyed this DIY ladder build.
Today we're going to be building a shoe rack from scratch. So my son had asked me to build him a shoe rack. I've built him a shoe rack once before. Eventually he didn't want it anymore. I used it in my craft room for some storage, ended up getting rid of it probably a couple of months ago, and now he has asked me to build him a new shoe rack. Of course. Anyways, he wanted one that's gonna like match his bedroom furniture that's a little bit different than the one that I had built him previously. So that's what we're doing today. I went to Home Depot and I picked up a couple of these 2x2 strips of wood, and I got 3 of them. I'm not going to need 3 of them. This is gonna be more for like the decorative element and not the functional part of the shoe rack. But the entire pallet was so warped. Everything was bent, twisted, not nice straight pieces of wood. So I picked up 3 of them that had at least a large portion that was straight before it started to curve. I probably only need less than 2 of these. They are 2x2 by 8 feet long. And then I picked up 2 of these 1x12 by 8 foot boards as well. Common board, lowest quality. We don't need anything fancy here. It is also the least expensive. The shelves themselves are going to be about 3 feet long. So that's where I'm gonna cut down my 1x12s at. We're gonna make a mark at 3 feet and then cut them down. I'm gonna be building 4 shelves here. Now, when I have to make cuts that are the exact same size, I like to take my board, set it directly on top of this next piece. Line up these edges, make sure they are nice and flush with each other. I always like to do this facing the other direction. So let me flip this over. So it's out of frame, but I'm gonna make sure the other end over here is completely flush with each other. And then we're gonna drag this over, pull our saw blade down, line them up, and then as soon as my blade hits this other board, that's where we know to stop, and that's where we're gonna make our cut. And it is the exact length you need every time. I love using this method. There we go. Our boards are the exact same lengths. I got my 4 shelves cut, and then next I need to make 3 1-foot pieces as well. And I can get 2 out of one of these scrap pieces, and then I can use the other scrap piece to get my last one.
I also cut down 6 pieces of the 2x2 that are the same height as the small 1x12 section, so they're 1 foot. All right, so now we need to figure out how wide I want this decorative section to be. And yes, I'm kneeling on my garage floor so you guys can see me. But this part is not going to be the full width of the board, where these ones that we cut down earlier, these are they're staying the same width as the board. It is the same board, but this will be on one end. So this will be more of the like structural support. This piece, it's still support, but it's gonna be more decorative. And like I said, not going to come right up to the edge here. So I need to figure out about how wide I want these to be. I was initially thinking that they would be 8 inches, so it would be 8 inches wide. This is a 12-inch board, so that it would leave a little bit of space on either end. So I kind of like where I have it set up right now. I'm just gonna quickly measure and see what that is. Let's speed this part up a bit. I got all the pieces cut down. The short side of the 2x2 ended up being 6 inches long. And then sanded everything down with a 120 and then a 220 grit sandpaper. This part took forever, and I'm sure you don't want to watch me sand for the next 5 minutes. To make these boards a little bit less hard on the edges, I got out my Dremel tool with a roundover bit attachment, which took the sharp corner off the board and rounded them. This is a small detail, but helps make a woodworking project look a little bit less handmade and DIY.
How come the stars come to shine when it's dark? From so far away, show us where we are. What makes the sun
Here are all of the pieces cut, sanded, and rounded.
and what's it dreaming of?
We are back inside. I got all of my wood cut. It is no longer daylight. It's completely dark outside. It is almost 9 o'clock at night now. I didn't really start this until about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but it took me all of that time to get all of these pieces cut and sanded. I did stop to eat dinner. But now we need to start gluing everything together. So I'm gonna start gluing the decorative little frame piece, and this is what it's gonna look like. I did one already. It's gonna be kind of like a little rectangle. So I need to make 2 more of these, and then I need to start adding some pocket holes to join the 1x12s together. So that's what we're gonna do next. Definitely not getting this finished tonight. I will probably come back to this, I don't know about tomorrow, but probably in a couple of days. Anyways, let's do what we can tonight. This part is super simple. All I'm doing is taking 2 of the longer pieces, 2 of the shorter pieces, and we're just going to glue them right in the middle. I didn't do any type of fancy cuts here. I am really sticking to my inspiration piece and trying to make it look as close to that as possible. And that is what they did. They did not have any 45-degree angle cuts on any of this shelf. This wood glue dispenser is amazing. I love it. It is linked in my description box. I get it from Amazon. I've had people ask me where I get it from, and it is absolutely amazing.
How come the sky sometimes hides behind the clouds? Maybe it's just like me, a little bit scared of heights. Why does as the rain.
Now we need to make some pocket holes. So each of these smaller boards is going to get 4 pocket holes. So it's going to get 2 on one end, 2 on another end. That way we can attach the shelves together to it and have more of those hidden screws. So we're going to attach 2 here, and then there's going to be another shelf here. We're going to attach the other 2 that way. And that's going to make this thing really sturdy. And I have a Craig pocket hole system. Super easy. I love this thing. We can do it right here. It's going to make a little bit of a mess, but I don't feel like going back out in the garage. Getting serious now. Got the paint shirt on, hair up, gloves out. We are going to stain the wood now. I want to stain it before I put the rest of the pieces together. I'm going to stain this wood. I'm going to paint our other little pieces once they dry, probably tomorrow. And then we can assemble everything and get it put together. So the color that I'm using today is dark walnut. This, I built Mason a floating bed frame. That's not something that I recorded a video of, but I built him a floating bed frame. We put some LED lights under it and we stained it dark walnut. So this is going to match his bedroom nicely.
I painted the decorative rectangle in the color Dark Secret by Bear. This is the same color I painted my faux mantle fireplace a few months ago, and I love it. Then I added 2 coats of polyacrylic to all of the pieces, sanding in between with a 220 grit paper. I know I mentioned this in all of my woodworking videos, but I like to use a natural bristle brush when applying poly. I think it leaves a really nice finish, and poly is self-leveling as long as you don't overwork it, so you don't end up seeing those brush strokes at all. I apply a layer of the polyacrylic to the entire side, and then I go back over the whole thing to make sure there are no bubbles and I have an even layer. You don't want to go over it more than that. Once it starts to dry, the self-leveling properties will no longer work and you'll see those brush strokes. It will end up looking more milky instead of clear.
All right, you guys, it is about a week later. I knew I wasn't going to get this thing finished, and then I had to go to work for the week. So we are back at it, trying to get this thing finished up today. All we got to do is put it together. There's going to be a little bit of wood glue dry time for those little black parts. But I wanted to show you, like, this is kind of how it's going to be laid out each shelf. And then there's going to be another shelf this way, and these 2 sides are going to be opposite. So then it's going to go up over here and then a black little piece on this side. So it's going to like kind of stagger a little bit. Putting this together, that's where our lovely flexi spot standing desk that's easily raised and lower is going to come in really handy, because as we start stacking and building, I can just lower my desk and it's going to stay at that same working height that's comfortable for me, which is amazing, especially because today, now this weekend, it is really cold outside and raining. So definitely helps to have this desk and I can build right in my craft room. I'm going to be using my 1.5 inch Craig screws here to go into the pocket holes that we drilled on these little side pieces. So I'm going to have my pocket hole screws. This is my one piece of wood that I didn't realize this as I was cutting it. It's kind of cupped a little bit. We're going to put this guy on the bottom so he's a little bit less noticeable. You can see it kind of goes in a little bit in the center and then comes back out to meet the ends. So this piece of wood is just kind of curved a little bit. Before I tighten anything, I want to make sure he is not poking out the bottom anywhere. I think we are good. I'm not going to tighten this all the way just yet. We're going to do the other side. So then I want to take my side piece and we need to figure out where exactly this is going to sit.
When adding the black rectangles, I placed them about 1 3/4 inches in from the edge, and then there was about 3/4 of an inch on either side. Then I used my wood glue on one end, spread it out with a brush, and then clamped it down in place to dry.
I don't want too much wood glue. This one's fine. Just a finished piece. A little bit. Yes.
After I clamped the piece down, I wiped up any of the glue that was seeping out. I actually recently learned you want there to be enough wood glue on so that it seeps out. This ensures you have a good suction and bond with the wood. I repeated this for 3 of the shelves.
The glue has dried on our side piece here. So we can assemble this thing and get it put in my son's room. And this is where it's gonna come in real handy to have this standing desk that can be raised and lowered at the touch of a button, because I cannot reach very tall. I'm very short. So this is gonna be so perfect. Which way does this go? This way, right? Yes, losing my mind slightly. Okay, that goes flush over here on this end. Those are in, and then we need to put the next level up, which I'm gonna have to, actually I might have to lower it for this guy. I think I should flip it over. So I'm drilling down instead of trying to reach under and drill up. Better idea. Now I'm gonna lower so that we can get the next one up. I think we gotta go all the way down here. Okay. We're as low as we go. Oh, I need to also glue, wood glue this side. So this will be perfect because I have one more layer and then I'll be able to reach it. Love that.
I added wood glue again where the black piece meets the shelf, but I'm not able to clamp it down again to dry. So I added some paint cans on the shelf for some weight to keep it in place. Then I added the third section.
Wasn't enough. Since I'm so short, I do need a bit of a stool to get up here, but put the top on. I'm so excited for this, you guys. So excited, you guys. All right, let's let this thing set up and dry overnight. I'm gonna glue this side, let it set.
I almost forgot I bought feet to add to the bottom of this. Now the inspo piece did not have feet, but I wanted to add some. I found these at Home Depot as well and painted them with the same black as the open rectangle sides. The next day, as I was sliding the shelf into the hall, I decided I wanted to reinforce the black rectangles a little. It felt like that wood glue would separate if I pushed it a little bit too hard. That's because I didn't glue raw wood together. It was already painted and sealed. So I took a spade bit to notch out a small hole. That way I can add a screw and you're not going to see it. I did this on the underneath so you don't see it from the top looking down or straight on at all. This added security makes me feel much better in case my son decides to rearrange his room. I don't have to worry about it falling apart on him. Then I just needed to add on the feet. This part was easy. I placed one foot down where I thought it looked good. Then I pushed down on it so the screw top would indent the wood. Then I measured where that was and made sure it was even. So it was 1 3/4 of an inch in from both edges. Next I took a piece of masking tape and taped off my drill bit so I knew how far down to drill. Then I made the hole, added some wood glue to the foot, and screwed it into place. Of all the woodworking projects I've done on this channel, I think this one is one of the easiest. Since there was no angle cuts, that made it pretty simple. If you've been intimidated by building your own furniture, give this project a try. I believe in you. This turned out beautifully and I saved over $800 making it myself. So let's see how it looks in its final location. You guys have been loving my high-end dupes, so today I'm sharing how you can get this plaster coffee table trend look for less. I took inspiration from a few different places, but I knew I wanted to make a plaster coffee table for my living room. All of my current furniture is square or rectangular with hard edges, so I wanted something more round to add some flow and comfort. I went to Lowe's to see what I could find to bring my vision to life and found these cylinder concrete forms. They were perfect to create the legs. And then I found a large 3-foot wood round for the tabletop. I think we could use a slightly bigger coffee table, but this still worked out great. I did find a circle table at the Goodwill bins for only $3, which would have been a steal compared to the Lowe's materials, but the circle was not solid and I didn't want to bother taking this whole thing apart just for that circle top. There was a ton of hardware holding it together underneath. I just wanted to show you you can recreate this on an even smaller budget. So here's the materials I'm using to create this table. Besides for the cement form and wood round, I'm using plaster of Paris, wood glue and Titebond glue, drywall tape, and putty knives. First thing I'm going to do is measure how tall I want the legs. Since this tube is 48 inches long, I split that into thirds so each leg is 16 inches. And I measured the 16 inches all the way around the tube, then took it out to my chop saw to cut it down. My saw didn't fit all the way through the form, so I would spin it a little bit, make sure the saw blade was lined up with that previous cut, and then continued until I cut all the way through the form. I think the legs turned out to be the perfect height for this coffee table. Next, I roughly placed the legs on the table and then measured the distance both between each leg and the distance to the edge of the table to make sure they were all evenly spaced. And you want to trace the tube so you know exactly where to put it back.
I saw you from across the room. When our eyes met, I never knew.
I used a combination of my wood glue and Titebond glue to attach the legs because the forms are not wood, so I didn't want to rely on only that wood glue. But pro tip, when using multiple adhesives, do not mix or overlap them. This will weaken their effectiveness as each adhesive has its own purpose.
I could feel this way, and it's kind of strange. Don't even know your name. I don't know you, but I want to.
Once the legs were on, I put cases of flooring on top for weight while they dried for a few hours, but you can use any heavy object. After the glue was set up for a bit, I'm taking the drywall tape and covering the entire table, the legs, and the wood top. This is going to give the plaster something to adhere to. thought I'd be able to fold the tape inside of the legs to create a clean edge, but that didn't work because these tubes are made for cement and they're coated with a wax or something like that so the cement doesn't stick. So instead, I had to just cut the tape against the edge. I wanted to make sure the tape was as smooth and flat as possible on the top of the table, so I paid really close attention to how I was lining each strip up and the way it would curve around the edges. And initially, this looked really good and really clean, but you'll see in a little bit it didn't quite stay that clean looking. Now, I had worked on taping this in the evening and didn't want to start the plaster that same night, so I came back to it the next day. And that's when I realized the tape had lifted up all along the edges and was no longer nice and smooth. But I kept going and mixed up my plaster. You only have about 5 to 10 minutes to work with plaster of Paris, so pro tip, mix small batches at a time. You want to take 1 part of cold water to 2 parts of plaster and then mix that up. It will be very liquidy at first, but quickly starts to thicken up and harden. Another pro tip, it's easier to mix when you add the water first. I forgot to do that a few times and ended up with dry clumps in my batch. This first coat of the plaster is just a skim coat to cover up the tape. Some of the tape will still show through at this point, so don't worry about getting full coverage here. And I started out using the putty knife, which was fine on that flat surface of the table, but I realized I needed something a little bit more flexible, so I switched over to a spatula a little later. Also, I apologize for some of the dim lighting. I really didn't want to get out my studio lights, but eventually I had to. Like I said, you want to work with small batches of the plaster. My ratio was 1 cup of water to 2 cups of plaster, and I mixed a new batch for each leg and then 2 batches each for both the top and bottom of the table. To make your life easier and to keep working, I would suggest having 2 mixing buckets. It is much easier to clean up if you let the plaster completely harden. Then you can simply squeeze the sides of the bucket and then dump it into the trash. So satisfying. I will also tell you, you want to make sure you fully wipe out the bucket as well as your spreading tools before mixing the next batch. On one of the legs, I didn't do that, and it caused the new batch of plaster to harden even faster, giving me less time to work. And the plaster ended up looking very lumpy on that area. After I got the skim coat on, I let it fully dry, and then I took a coarse sanding sponge to knock off any of that super rough section before adding the next coat. You don't want to skip this step or the plaster will only continue to build up in those rougher sections where you don't want it to. When I put on the next layer, I used my spatula to apply the plaster. This made it much easier to get it onto the legs, and then I used my putty knife to smooth it and spread it. All right, now that the bottom is looking good, let's flip this table right side up and work on the top. After I got this skim coat on, something wasn't looking quite right. You guys, I am such an idiot. I don't know what I was thinking, but one of my legs here is shorter than the other two. I measured this. I know I measured this multiple times, but for whatever reason, I didn't make sure that all three were the same height before putting them onto this table. So two of them are great, and then the other one is like a 1/2 inch lower than the other two. So I'm like, great. I am not taking these legs off of the table. I've already added the plaster, added the tape, like that was a whole process in and of itself. So I went back to the hardware store and got another 8-inch tube, form tube, whatever these things are. Well, guess what? Apparently, all of these 8-inch form tubes are not actually all 8 inches, and they are not all the same size either in diameter. So, you know, I showed this one at the beginning, it was 8 inches. This one also says it is 8 inches. Guess what? It's too big. So I got another one. This one is also 8 inches. Guess what? Too big. So I don't know why it did that, but I was like, you know what, it's fine, we can work with it. I only needed a little sliver. I cut like 1/2 inch off here. I don't even think it was 1/2 inch, something like that. But it's too big. It's still too wide, which is, I mean, it's like a solid inch bigger. So this is like a 9-inch. Unless this was a 7, I don't know, but it doesn't fit. So I'm gonna have to like cut this one. We're gonna have to like squeeze it on here, like kind of reform the circle. It's just not gonna be a solid circle like this is. I think it's gonna be fine. And then we're gonna retape, plaster it, and then my table should all be level. So, fingers crossed. I glued the little sliver on top with my Titebond glue and let that set up for a little bit. I decided not to tape it since this section was so small, and then I used a little bit of plaster to blend it into the rest of the leg. I can't even tell where that piece was added. All right, back to the top. I sanded down the surface. This is still the skim coat, and I need to add that second layer of plaster. This is not a difficult project, but it is very repetitive. You do the same thing over and over. Add the plaster, spread it out, and sand. So you can see on these edges here, there's some like big bumps and divots around the edges, and that's from the way that the tape was laying. So I think that because I had done the tape one evening and then did the plaster the next day, the tape had started to like peel away from the table. And I had it laid down really nicely, but if I had done the tape and then the plaster right away, I don't think I would have had this issue. I mean, I do like it that it's more organic looking, but I am gonna use my hand this time on the second coat with a glove to get this a little bit more smooth and evened out.
I saw you from across the room. When our eyes met, I never knew that I could feel this way, and it's kinda strange. Don't even know your name. I don't know you, but I
As I was adding the second layer on top, I started to overwork the plaster a little bit and it was hardening. If that happens and the plaster starts to ball up on you, that's okay, leave it alone, let it dry fully, and then you can come back in with a scraper and those pieces just come right off. Then again, we need to sand the whole thing down. I could have stopped here and sealed it, but because I had overworked the plaster a little bit, I didn't love how it was looking. I loved the textural areas, but then there were some areas where there were these lines that just made it look cheap and not professional in my opinion. So I decided to add one last layer of the plaster, and this time I mixed up a double batch. So I did 2 cups of cool water and 4 cups of plaster. Then I poured it all out on top of the table and spread it out. I also made sure to keep wiping off my putty knife with the excess plaster that was building up on it. This helped prevent those large divot areas. And this method was much easier for getting it all spread evenly out on the surface before it started to harden. This is the look that I was going for. There's a little bit of texture and interest, but it's still flat enough to use as a coffee table. Now we need to give it one last sand to make sure the top is relatively smooth. Since this does have a texture to it, it's not going to be flat, but you can set a drink on top and it's not going to fall over. All that's left to do is to seal it up. Since plaster is water soluble, you definitely want to make sure you seal it. I'm using a matte polyacrylic with a natural bristle brush and added 3 coats, lightly sanding in between with a 220 grit sanding sponge. The first coat absorbs into the surface pretty quickly, and you want to make sure to get all the little nooks and crannies with the brush. Now, I know this is a matte sealer, but it does have a slight sheen to it. It's not perfectly matte like the plaster was without it, but I'm okay with this finish. If you want more of a true matte finish, you could try using a wax instead. I love the way this little table came out. I have been envisioning something like this for a while, and I think it really elevates my living room. And the final cost was a little over $100, with the wood round being the most expensive piece. So if you can find a circle table while you're out thrifting, you can recreate this for much less. Today, I am going to show you how my husband and I recreated this $1,100 Pottery Barn reclaimed wood console table. So first thing we had to do was head to Home Depot, pick up all of our supplies. So we grabbed 4 of these 2x4x8 boards. They were about $8 a piece. They are so expensive right now. We also grabbed 4 of these 2x8x8 boards that were about $15 each. The wood totaled about $90 for us. We do get a military discount, but it would have been about $110 without that. Much better than that $1,100 price tag of the Pottery Barn piece. Once we got home, we had to cut everything down, so we ended up using the 2x4s as the entire frame part of this project. I will show you all the measurements here on the screen in just a second, but if you don't have a chop saw, a miter saw, some type of saw to cut this wood down, you can certainly ask the guys at Home Depot to help you out with the measurements. So for the legs, we cut those down to be 31 inches long, and then we cut down 5 brace pieces that were 10 inches long, and we also cut down the long frame pieces, which were 5 feet 5 inches long, because the total length of my table is going to be 6 feet. That is what I'm showing you here. However, we did cut 7 inches off of two of the longest 5 foot by 5 inch boards because we wanted them to sit inside of the frame. And you'll see that here in a little bit as everything starts to come together. We decided to add pocket holes into all of the boards because I didn't want to be able to see any of the screws anywhere on this frame. So we have this little Kreg jig tool, and we just added 2 pocket holes on both sides of all of the boards that we cut down. My husband was such a great partner during this whole build. He showed me a lot of what to do, how to do things, and then we tag teamed a lot of this work together. Once all of the pocket holes were added, I did sand everything down, and I used a 60 and an 80 grit sandpaper for these 2x4 boards. They were extremely rough cut coming from Home Depot. I would suggest sanding everything regardless of how rough the wood looks, just to make sure you have a nice smooth surface and a smooth finish. Now it's time to build everything, put it all together. So we ended up using wood glue and 2.5 inch long Kreg screws to hold the frame together. And that way the screws will hold it in place, but that wood glue is just some added security and will give a really tight bond. We started out building the top of the frame, so we added in 3 of those 10-inch boards to one of the 5 foot 5 inch boards, and we added 2 of the 10-inch boards on both ends and then 1 directly in the center. Once the 3 10-inch boards were added, we then took another 5 foot 5 inch board to add on the other side and complete our rectangle for the top of the frame. And we just used our, I was going to say hot glue, we used our wood glue and our Kreg screws again to hold that in nice and secure. Also using the speed square to make sure that everything is flush and level to each other. Once the top frame was built, we added in the legs, doing that same exact process, using the speed square to make sure everything was nice and level, adding in the wood glue, and then adding in the 2.5 inch Kreg screws into those pocket holes. Now the inspiration piece only had 1 top shelf. I wanted my piece to have a second shelf in the middle, well, slightly above the middle. So we measured 15 inches from the bottom of the leg, and that was where we were going to add our second shelf. So it was a little bit higher than center. And to support that shelf, we're adding in 2 more of those 10-inch brace pieces on either side in between the 2 legs. This is where we took off 7 inches from 2 of those 5 foot boards so that we could add in a brace to the center of that middle shelf. and that way it would just give a little added support for the shelf to sit on. We started out having it sideways and then ended up putting it down flat just the same as the top frame so that it all looked cohesive. And we just added some scrap wood underneath to hold it in place while we screwed everything together. We did the same thing for the very bottom. We only put a brace in the back because I wanted the front to be open. Next, I am taking some plastic wood or wood filler, and I'm going to start adding this into all of the areas where the wood meets together. I did not want to see any of these seams. I wanted this to be a seamless piece and look very professional, like it came from the factory and like you couldn't even tell where the wood met together. I also wanted to fill in all of those pocket holes, so taking some dowels, I had this variety pack from Walmart, and I'm just going to add them in with some wood glue. Add the dowel in, and then I'm going to show you two different methods for cutting these off and getting a nice close cut. First, I am taking this flexible flush cut handsaw. This was a little bit more work, but it got the job done. For the second option or method that I'm going to show you, I used a multi-tool, and this was a little bit faster, a little bit easier to do, but both options will give you a nice flush cut. And again, I am taking some of that wood filler and adding it in on top of the dowels and the pocket holes because I still want this to be a seamless piece and I don't want you to be able to see where those screws held the boards together. Once all of the wood filler was dry, I took some 100 grit sandpaper and I just sanded everything nice and smooth so that when I ran my hand across it, you couldn't feel any bumps. And now we can finally move on to the fun part of painting. So I am using this Rust-Oleum Ultra Cover Semi-Gloss Black paint along with a short-handled synthetic bristle angled brush to get this paint on. I do have a paint sprayer, but honestly, I love painting. I think it is so soothing and relaxing, so I just chose to hand paint this piece. And I went with a semi-gloss here because the inspiration piece was actually made out of metal, but I wanted to get like a somewhat metal-esque look. I know you're still going to be able to tell this is wood, but having that gloss finish is going to help with that overall aesthetic. And I know painting is self-explanatory, so I'm not going to make you watch too much of it. Next up, we are moving on to the shelves. So taking these 2x8x8 boards, we're going to measure them and cut them down. 2 are going to be 6 feet long and 2 of them are going to be 5 feet 5 inches long, the same as the length of the frame itself. Because I wanted the middle shelf to sit in between the frame, we did have to cut one of these boards down to be thinner. So it is 2.5 inches wide, and we just used our table saw to rip this board down. Once the boards were all cut down to size, it was time to distress them and start making them look beat up, antiqued, reclaimed wood, just like that Pottery Barn inspiration. And so we just used all kinds of tools we had laying around the garage.
I don't know how to use this thing.
It's a camp knife, so you can chop, you can cut.
Of course, my husband had to make fun of me a bit because I had no idea how to use this tool at first, and you see me acting so gingerly as if not to hurt the wood, although that's what I was trying to do. So we just started cutting out some gouges here and there, beating it up with another 2x4 piece of wood. My husband was just trying to think of anything that would naturally beat up wood if it were sitting around on a work site. So he grabbed a cinder block as well, just started rubbing it up and down the boards to add some scratches and some dents and just all kinds of different aging. Or distressing, I guess. I think he ended up having a little bit more fun with this than I did. He was going to town beating up these boards and getting out all kinds of different tools to use. In the end, I was actually a little nervous. I didn't think it was going to look that good at first, but once we added the stain, it was perfect. We wanted to brand this piece, and my husband has this brand with his initials on it inside of a keystone for Pennsylvania, which is where we live. He actually makes wood flags, and he puts this brand on all of his flags. We want to get another one made that has AJ on it for both of our initials, since we both worked on this project, but this was the only one that we had for now. After he cleaned that up, you can see how nice and raised this brand looks on the bottom of the shelf. And we put this on one on each of the shelves. Next, we're going to stain, and I wanted to pick something that was going to complement the wood floors already in my house. So that's what you saw up in that top picture. I just added a bunch of different stains to this same wood board, and we landed on Varathane's Early American. So I started staining all 4 of my boards, and I gave them 2 coats of stain, and I let them completely dry for a full day in between to really let that stain seep into the wood. And you can really see all of that detail coming out in the wood where we beat it up, dinged it up, all of those scratches, and the stain just really settles in there and deepens it up, and I just absolutely love the way these turned out. Once the stain was all set, it's time to move on to sealing the boards, and I am using this Minwax polyacrylic. I like the water-based sealers, and I'm using clear matte for this with a natural bristled brush. The way I apply sealer is with very thin layers. I don't want to let it pull into those areas where there are some nicks and dings. I put it on very thin, and then I'm going to sand it down in between each of the layers. So I put a total of 3 coats of the polyacrylic on my shelves, and then I let each layer dry, sanded it down with a 400 grit sandpaper. This is very fine sandpaper. You do not want to add any pressure at all when sanding this. Just rub it along the surface to just get a nice smooth feel, and you'll see how it turns white a little bit. That's fine. That's just from the top coat. Wipe it away. It comes off just fine. And then you're going to take another layer of the polyacrylic, put another really thin layer on, sand it again, and then on my 3rd and final layer, I do not sand that one. And that all just helps to make these tabletop shelves very smooth to the touch. For the base or frame of the table, I am using this Varathane triple thick polyurethane in a clear satin finish. And here you can see just how thick this stuff is, so much thicker than that polyacrylic we used on the shelves. So you really want to make sure to use a very thin coat here. Otherwise, you're going to get like a hazy look to the color and to your project, which is not what we're going for. So I picked a satin finish here because, like I said earlier, I wanted this to have that kind of metal-esque look, and that satin finish helps achieve that. So for the base, I only ended up putting 2 coats on here because it is so thick. So I put a regular coat on first, sanded it all down with my 400 grit sandpaper, and then I ended up watering down the final coat that I put on and then did not sand that part. Now we can finally attach everything and see it come together. So I am finding all of the centers and the areas where I want to add in my screws. And again, I don't want to see any of those screws holding the shelves in place. So we're marking where we want them to go, and then we're going to countersink them. And that way we can put the screw in, hold the shelf together, and you won't see anything. Using this Craig pocket bit, we just added a piece of painter's tape where we wanted to stop drilling at, and I'm going to add in a hole right where I made all of my markings where the screws are going to go to hold our shelves in place. Next up, I need to change out my bit so that we can add on our screws, and we are using some exterior wood grabber screws here, and I end up showing you the wrong side, which is in another language. I will insert a picture of the correct side here. So we're going to place our boards on before we screw them down. We clamp them down in place, and we use our speed squares as like a spacer so that there was a little bit of a gap in between each of the boards. And my husband has to help me because I am so weak when it comes to doing things like this, especially upside down. And then for the top shelf, I did want the back of the shelf to be flush against the frame, and then the front has a little bit of an overhang. So we added this one in place, and that was it for this table, you guys. I am just so proud of what we accomplished. Moving inside, before we could bring the table in, I did want to cover up all of those cords that are hanging down from the TV. So I just got this cord cover kit from Home Depot. It's about $16, and I do need to cut it down a little bit because it was too long for where I wanted. I wanted this to sit directly in line and above our outlet. So I just marked off where I needed to cut this down, and then I took it out into my garage with my miter box. That's all you need for this one, just a little handsaw, and cut it down really quick. Then we just attached it to the wall and we slid the cover over top. I spared you from seeing my husband actually screw it to wall because he was not wearing a shirt during that part. So high five, go us. Last little step I needed to do was paint this to match our walls. This isn't necessary. It's not going to blend in completely, but I thought it was a nice added detail and made this whole piece or whole area come together. So here's a look at the space before we built the console table. It is just a mismatch of tables that are getting cluttered, and I am so over looking at all of these random pieces in my living room. Yes, you will see some of my DIY projects in here as well. I literally have no more space for anything in my home unless it has a specific area that it is going to. So that is why I created my website, which I will also link below if you are interested in checking it out or buying any of the projects that I make. And here is a look at how the table turned out. I think we did a pretty spot-on job duping that Pottery Barn $1,100 console table, but you'll have to let me know in the comments what you think. I hope you enjoyed this in-depth tutorial on how to build a console table, and that's all I got for you today, friends. I'll see you in the next one.